On today's Join Us in France, the lovely city of Montpellier in the southwest of France and why it has so much to offer. Thank you for tipping your guide, Kelly Woods. If you too would like to support the show, head on over to joinusinfrance.com/support. Thank you. I misspoke at the beginning of my conversation with Elise on Montpellier. I said it was episode 104, and it's not, it's 105. There's been so many, I can't keep track. This is Join Us in France, episode 104. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And Join Us in France is a travel show all about France. And today we go to the beautiful city of Montpellier.
Montpellier.
Yes.
Or Montpellier for those of us who are not born in France.
Montpellier. No, yeah, well, people there might say it Montpellier as well. So it wouldn't be so surprising. But before we get to that, of course, I need to ask you what you've been up to because you've been gone.
I know you always ask me that. Well, excuse me. I've just come back from going back to the States for a fairly long time to visit my family on the West Coast.
Yes.
Which is always a pleasure.
Yes, yes.
I actually spent a few days in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is the first time I've been back in quite a while, and it reminded me of just how beautiful it is there. It was lovely, although it was a very short visit. And then into the Pacific Northwest, where it rained. What else?
Predictably.
What else? Which is why the trees are so huge.
Yeah. Did it rain a lot or was it more like drizzle?
Actually, this time it rained a lot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I always go back in the winter, somewhere between January and February. And I've had, in the last 3 years, 1 year where I got snowed in, which was extremely rare.
Yeah.
1 year, last year, where there was a lot of sun and almost no rain. And this time where I had a little bit of sun about 3 or 4 days and then some torrential rains.
Ah, wow.
And they're having an extremely wet, well beyond normal winter.
That's weird.
Well, it's part of the climate change.
Yeah, it happens.
I mean, it's really and normally the Pacific Northwest actually is wet, but doesn't have as much rainfall as the Northeast. But this year, I think they're going to have as much.
More precipitation.
Yeah, real heavy rain.
Well, France here, the Toulouse area, has been pretty wet too. It's kind of warming up slowly, but we've had a wet winter. Not cold. It hardly froze.
Not cold.
It froze a couple of times and just in the middle of the night for a couple of hours.
My sweaters are still in the closet. That's how I gauge things.
Yeah. It's really didn't get very cold, but the spring is trying to come up.
Yeah, the crocuses and daffodils are actually out.
Yeah, my daffodils are spent already.
Well, the thing about the Pacific Northwest, but California, I guess, is different because it really does have a Mediterranean climate, and there was actually a lot of rain there too.
Yeah.
But what was surprising in the more or less Portland area was that everything was in bloom.
Yeah.
And it was far too early in terms of what it normally is, which is, I think, what's happening everywhere.
That's right. That's right.
But it was very nice.
Oh, great. That's wonderful. Well, the travel season is about to gear up again.
Gear up again.
Yes, we're going to, I'm sure the visitors are coming.
Yep, it starts basically, you can feel the rumblings, there's these waves in the air, and it starts pretty much April is really the beginning of the travel season, and that just seems to be the way it is. The airwaves start pushing.
Every year it's that way. So today we're going to talk about Montpellier, which we haven't talked about.
No.
And I hadn't really pushed it because I had never been inside of Montpellier myself. I had been through Montpellier many times.
On the autoroutes.
Yeah, on the freeway system, which is It really is bad. I always dread going there because Montpellier is at the junction where you have to. Everybody takes it. If you're coming from Spain and you're trying to go north in France,
right,
you're going to go through there. If you're trying to go to the Provence, you're going to go through there.
That's right.
It's like it's a really, really busy freeway.
Busy area.
And so I've gotten stuck there a few times. And so I for me it was like c'est les bouchons, c'est la ville des bouchons. But which means it's the city of
traffic jams.
Traffic jams. Sorry, thank you. But it's not. This time I went in.
You went in.
I went in.
You went in. Why? Because for two reasons. One, because of Igor.
Yes, one because of Igor, yes.
And the other because of me.
That's right, because you had said that you had just been and saw this museum with a great exhibit that we're going to talk about today.
And
even
that
though
I was starting to get to know the city.
Right, that you were getting to.
Which I hadn't known myself.
Because you have family there,
right,
so you go. And Igor is the guide dog that I had at my house for a couple of years as a puppy, and he's now guiding in Montpellier. And his owner works in the city center of Montpellier, so he has to deal with the trams and a lot of traffic. And his owner kept on telling me how well he was doing with all these things, but it was hard for me to picture it without actually seeing it.
Yeah.
And now that I've seen it, I'm like, this dog is amazing.
It's interesting, too, that Montpellier has a very, very good reputation outside of the region itself. I mean, if you ask people anywhere in France about a city that seems to have a certain first of all, it's a good place to live. It has a wonderful reputation for its student life and its cultural life, which is very similar to Toulouse in that sense.
Right.
But it's an incredibly interesting phenomenon that I have never heard anybody, except perhaps me, say anything negative about Montpellier. And it's not even based on anything other than a certain aesthetic that it's not my favorite thing.
We'll get to that.
But the thing is that it's a city that has a very positive image in most people's minds, and it is a city that is growing enormously.
Yeah, I think it might be growing faster than Toulouse, or at least as fast.
At least as fast
as Toulouse.
As fast. And of course, like typically, I guess we could relate this in the States to people going south. You know, the cities like Montpellier, which are really basically on the Mediterranean, because if you can say that it's 7 kilometers, which is 4 miles away from the coast.
Yeah.
This is really being next to the water.
But it doesn't have a port, right? I mean,
it did have a port.
Okay.
It was in fact the original creation of the city was due to the fact that one of the rivers opens into the Bay Area that's right there.
Okay.
And that was the reason why it was considered to be a pivotal place to create some kind of a major, what we would call city, but of course it was a very, very long time ago. But I just find it very interesting that when people hear Montpellier, they go, "Oh yes," and they smile.
Yes,
it's a very interesting phenomenon, you know.
And I can totally see it now. I mean, I can. And of course, because I was with this family that has Igor now, they showed us around, they hosted us, and they were lovely. And they told us all about Montpellier because they have been living there for decades,
right?
And so they knew a lot about the history and Nicolas' mom. Nicolas is the owner, the guide dog owner. His mom, who took us around, she knows a lot about history, and she knows a lot about. So some of the things I'm going to share with you, that's where I got it from.
Yeah.
It's not that I know that much about it, but she told me a lot of details that were really interesting.
It's very interesting, too, because from the point of view of us being here in Toulouse, we are really in the center between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic.
Right.
And we are a brick city. We're a nice orange-red brick city. And when you go either to the west, which is Bordeaux country, it's limestone. And when you go to Montpellier, it's limestone.
Again, yes.
It's again limestone. And very, very white. And I think that that's one of the things about it. It's that you have the sunshine of the Mediterranean plus the white stone, which gives it a certain look that is very, very different from anything that you have around here.
Toulouse is very red compared to Montpellier is very white Haussmannian type buildings, which Toulouse doesn't have very many of. So it's a very but Bordeaux does.
But Bordeaux does.
Right. So we're in between, and we don't quite fit in. We're really the Occitan kind of capital in Toulouse.
We're special.
Yeah,
let's face it.
Yeah, we're great.
But let's talk about Montpellier, because I guess otherwise we're going to start playing out the national anthem of Toulouse or whatever the rugby teams. Montpellier actually also has a very good rugby team and a good soccer team.
Oh, and they have an amazing women's basketball team.
Do they?
They beat us all the time. It's horrible. I complain bitterly about them, but they are very good. They're fun to watch.
They're fun to watch.
Yes.
All right.
They're national champions and have been for
should we do a few statistics? We were talking about this yesterday. Let's talk statistics.
Go.
The metropolitan area of Montpellier, which I think is the kind of place where probably every day it gets bigger, literally.
Yeah.
It's just about 500,000 people. And it is, as of 2013, it was the 8th city of France.
Right.
Which, for France, 500,000 is a sizable city.
It really is. Toulouse,
it really is.
I mean, the metropolitan area of Toulouse is almost 1 million.
Almost 1 million.
Right. So
which makes us number 4 theoretically.
Right. It's much bigger. Toulouse is much bigger, but Montpellier looks like more of a... it looks bigger.
Well, you know what? I think it's the same phenomenon that you find when you go to Bordeaux. This is I don't know if this is accurate. Both Bordeaux and Montpellier do not have a very, very distinct set-off enclosed old city center. The city doesn't seem to have a part that's the old part, and then all of a sudden it gets to the newer part. Whereas Toulouse, really, if you think about it, the old city center part is rather small. It's circular, and you see it very clearly. You see where it stops and where the rest of the city, which is very much a horizontal sprawl anyway.
Yeah.
It just begins. Montpellier actually has bigger buildings. It's much more of a city that has recent construction that are higher buildings.
Yeah.
Not even though high by French standards.
Yeah.
And there is no very clear separation between what would be the oldest part and the rest of it. And it's also close to the Mediterranean, which means that once you leave Montpellier, you are barely in countryside before you come upon another basically urbanized area. So there's this sense of it being very big, which you just don't seem to get here in Toulouse, because when you leave Toulouse, you just hit the countryside pretty much in 10, 15 minutes.
Right. To come to my house, you have to go through woods.
I have to go through woods. There might
every
be
time.
Wolves in the woods.
And I'm only 15 minutes away from the belt route.
Right.
But you really feel like you've left the metropolitan area.
Right.
Whereas maybe in Montpellier you never feel like that.
No.
Yet we have twice as many people.
Yeah, we have twice as many people.
It's probably because we spread all around the city. In every which direction.
I think that the difference is that Montpellier is really a concentrated population, and Toulouse is they incorporated a lot of villages. Is literally what they did.
Yeah.
The distance between Toulouse and Montpellier is 196 kilometers. For those of you out there who want to, you can convert it to miles. I didn't even try. To Paris, it's 595. It's literally 2.5 hours by high-speed train.
To where?
To Paris.
No, it's 3 hours to Lyon.
A high-speed train.
Yeah. So
No.
I was looking it up this morning. It said 3 hours and 15 minutes to Lyon.
No, that's incorrect, because I've actually taken the train from here to Lyon and stopped in Montpellier. It's not, unless you take the train that stops a lot. The train doesn't.
I haven't done it, so yeah.
But it may be 3.5 hours, but it's really it's not very far. It's 125 kilometers from Marseille. So you really
it's a little west of Provence.
It's west of Provence,
but on the Med.
It's the region that, of course, is called Languedoc-Roussillon.
Right, but now it's going to change names.
Now we're having this.
We have to.
What is the name?
So they're in our region. So they're now fusing the regions. We have to talk about this because listeners have asked me. The regions are being fused together in France in order to save some money. Okay? So the region Toulouse, Midi-Pyrénées,
which was a big region with 8 departments.
Which was already a big region.
Very big.
Is being fused with Languedoc-Roussillon. So the capital of Languedoc-Roussillon was Montpellier, the capital of Midi-Pyrénées was Toulouse. The two are fusing. Our region has chosen to hold a vote, an informal vote. It's being done through the newspapers. And most people seem to be favoring Occitanie as the new name.
Right.
Occitania.
It's the heritage of the area.
It's the heritage of the area. There's really nothing much to say about that. The only people who are going to have a gripe against it are the Catalans.
The Catalans.
Right in Perpignan.
Right.
Because the very tippy side, southern edge of the region is Catalonia.
Right.
But... yeah, we're not going to call it Occitan, Catalan, or whatever, because it's tiny. I mean, I'm sorry, anyway. So yesterday they the North region, which was called originally.
There were two. It was
Nord-Pas-de-Calais,
Nord-Pas-de-Calais, Picardy, which is a very ancient term, Picardy, because there was actually a Count of Picardy.
Right. So they. Voted.
They voted.
So their legislature, the regional leaders, have voted for this new name, and they called it Hauts-de-France, which is extremely unfortunate because everybody is making fun of it. First of all, it's Hauts-de-France. The problem is, sounds like water.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the same sound. It's the same sound.
Exactly.
And then you have to name the people who come from that region. Donc, les gens qui viennent du Hauts-de-France sont des autistes.
Les Hautois, les Hautains.
Des Hautains. It doesn't matter which way you slice it, we're going to make fun of it.
Yep.
They should have had a focus group because this is just not going to work. And the other region that's going to do it the same way is the Eastern region, which has Alsace, Champagne, anyway, a bunch of them. And they need to find a name that makes sense.
I don't think they should have reunited all of these regions personally.
Well, but that's just
I mean, it's cumbersome from an administrative point of view, and I think that there is such a thing as a regional identity in France,
Right, but the regions were divided up in...
Yeah, but like Alsace is really Alsace, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, Burgundy is really Burgundy.
Yeah.
We probably meld in more with Languedoc than anybody, and since that it's all pretty much
and Bordeaux, that region is going to be Aquitaine. That's what it's going to be called.
That's what it was.
That's the ancestral name.
For 1,000 years,
right.
And,
but of course, the Basque Country...
Yeah.
Is there too.
That's true.
Just like the Catalans, but it's at the very tippy bottom, and probably the region's not going to have the name Basque anywhere in
That's true.
And people want to make shorter names too. They don't want to use this super long, like Picardie, Nord, Pas-de-Calais, blah, 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 blah.
I think Occitania is perfect.
Occitanie is good. I'm good.
As long as we stay the capital.
And we are. It's already been decided.
And that's been decided.
Toulouse stays the capital.
So Montpellier comes in second.
Right. Yes. Anyway, so close the parentheses. I'm sorry, but I've been asked. So I wanted to mention
this morning.
Well, I wanted to mention it because yesterday I was laughing to myself all day about les autistes. I mean...
We'll find something nasty to say about each region, I think, at the end.
Eventually, yes.
The other thing about Montpellier is that it has a Mediterranean climate.
Very much so.
Very much so.
Yes.
Okay, so that's already one of the reasons why it is one of the fastest growing cities in France. Mm-hmm. It has something like 300 days of sun a year. Mm-hmm. It's a very, in that way, it's lovely to go there, especially when you come out of the kind of gray, low skies of Toulouse in the middle of the winter,
Yes.
When I was there in January, the sun was shining.
Yes.
Walking along the beach was lovely, even though it was too cold to do anything else as far as I was concerned.
But still.
But you can sit outside and feel the sun and the blue sky and blue sea, and it's just lovely.
Nice. It can rain too, but
it can rain.
But it's a better climate than Toulouse.
Right.
There's no doubt about it.
But as opposed to Toulouse, and this is really interesting to know, there is, of course, an old city center, but in comparison, there's very little left of what would really be the ancient buildings, and most of the buildings that are left in what is the old little city center, which the narrow streets that kind of go up and down, it's a little bit hilly actually in the old city center, are actually not older than the 17th century. And that is in comparison to Toulouse, where the buildings go way, way, way back to the 13th century.
Well, they do have a piece of wall when you go near the Arc de Triomphe, which is very showy. They have... So if you're facing the statue of Louis XIV from the Arc de Triomphe, to your left, going downhill a little bit, there's this very old house that's a very old structure. I'll put a picture on it on joinusinfrance.com/104. And it's what they called La Maison des Octrois.
Yeah.
And it was where people came in.
It's the customs house, basically.
To pay dues to come into the city.
Right.
And that is very old.
Yes.
I didn't check how old, but it looks really old.
But there were actually, that's what I was just looking up yesterday. There were only 3 or 4 structures left from the real Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Most of it was rebuilt in what we would now call the classical times, the time of Louis XIV.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, part of that is due to the fact that it was a city, of course, as you and I both know, that was very, very heavily involved in the War of Religions, because it was a city that in the 1500s, for reasons that are very, very complex because of the region where it is, became very Protestant.
Yes.
So the parts of the oldest parts of the city were actually destroyed during the War of Religion. But according to what I was reading, the rest of it was simply because it was let to fall apart. And there was no concern to really conserve the old parts of the city, because it was a city that lost its walls around it very early compared to a city like Toulouse. One of the reasons, very ironically, that Toulouse has so much left of Middle Ages structures inside it is because the walls stayed up till the beginning of the 19th century.
Yeah.
So what you have a lot in Montpellier is beautiful classical architecture.
Yes.
Which is very beautiful, and of course is very suitable to the limestone, which is the stone that you find everywhere there. So it's old by American standards, but it's not ancient as you can find in other cities, Rouen in the north, Toulouse in the south. However, what I didn't know until I was doing the research yesterday is that in the Middle Ages, from the 1200s into the 16th century, the 3 most populous cities in France were Rouen, Toulouse, and Montpellier.
Huh. Wow.
More than Paris.
More than Paris.
More than Paris. And one of the reasons why, and
there are
something
critical
that
junctions.
we both know, the whole point of the critical junction, the same reason that you said you never had stopped there before because of where it is.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that is why it was so important in the Middle Ages, because the trade routes, it was literally built on what was the Via Domitia, Domitian, which is the Roman road.
Yes.
So it literally is on the road that goes all the way up to Lyon and down into Spain, north-south route built by the Romans.
Yep.
It was the crisscross road going east to west, going towards Marseille and then towards Toulouse and Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm. It has been that way forever. I mean, it's just the way
in the 11 and 1200s, which is actually the period when it became a grand city, it was famous because it was the center of all kinds of trade. And there were 3 things, even then, that were important. The trading of spices, trading of wine, which is still the case in the region, and textiles. And it was also because you had a place there where people could very quickly get to the sea. They had actually built a port on one of the 2 small rivers. One of them is called the Lez. And they were actually shipping things out from there. So it carried on the old Roman tradition of being an intersection for going east, west, north, south, etc.
Yeah.
And it bottled up there for the same reasons that it became a traffic jam in the 20th century.
Yes.
Very interestingly. But it's also for that reason that it has the honor of having the oldest medical school in France from 1269.
Oh, over there they say in the world. That's
No.
what they told
Well,
me.
now, that's not true.
Okay.
Because you will never guess where the oldest one is. But that's also true because it's interesting to know that the oldest university in Europe is also disputable. But it's actually both the oldest university and the oldest medical school, believe it or not, are in Italy. In Salerno, of all places.
Wow, yeah.
Which is in southern Italy.
Yeah.
In Catania, in southern Italy. It is the oldest medical school officially designated as such in Europe, or at least let's say Western Europe, because I don't think we could talk about anywhere else, actually. And the medical school in Montpellier is second oldest. It is indeed second oldest, just like the oldest university in Western Europe is in Padua in Italy. And in France, it is the second.
And if you're a doctor or a dentist, or in any way in the medical professions, they hold huge conventions of all sorts of medical things in Montpellier. So it's, if you're in that kind of profession, you've probably heard of it just on account of all the conventions that they hold.
It's interesting to know that for the last almost 800 years, it has stayed famous for its medical school.
Yes.
It's amazing when you think about it,
And if you're a French student who wants to go to medical school, most anything you study in France, you want to go to Paris to do it, because if you want to be a musician, well, the conservatory is more famous in Paris and the engineering schools are more famous, etc. Well, when it comes to medicine, a lot of young people want to go to Montpellier and not Paris necessarily, even though they both have medical schools. Obviously.
Even it's interesting because it, of course, is, and of course, it's stayed a major teaching university. And that's the other thing. Toulouse's university system is a little older. It's the second oldest in France, but Montpellier came very soon after that. So the designation of Montpellier as a trade center, as a rich city, and then as a place of learning started very, very, very early.
Yeah. The one of the recent mayors of Montpellier that we'll talk about. I don't know if we should talk about him yet.
My eyes are rolling. You might as well go ahead and talk about him.
His name was Georges Frêche. He changed a lot of things for Montpellier, and he actually did an ad campaign targeted to the Montpellierains, the people of his city, saying les surdoués, so the gifted ones. Montpellier is the city for the gifted people, and they really believe that. I mean, just ask them; they'll tell you. Yeah,
that they're gifted there.
Yes, that we're smarter than everybody else. Yeah. And it's just because they have this culture of we do everything big. We have vision. It's that sort of attitude that they have over there.
Well, that's very interesting because we're bouncing back and forth in history, but that's fine too. One of the things about Montpellier, which has made it very attractive, is that it has created a very, very good modern urbanism.
Yeah.
And so what you get in Montpellier, which is quite different from cities like Toulouse, unfortunately, which have an incoherent policy about how to develop new buildings and new neighborhoods. Montpellier has, in the past, hired some major architects to recreate the neoclassical architecture using the lovely white limestone.
And let me tell you, they went to town.
And they went to town. And so you have this fabulous area called the Antigone area, which is done by an architect. One of the architects is Beaufil.
Okay.
And apparently it became famous in the world. I don't remember if it was, I think in the 1980s, but I may be wrong. But it's like they took on the idea of making a brand new area with very good transportation, with lovely green space, with fountains and all of this, and keeping basically the old style and doing it in a very, very good way. And it's really quite impressive to see.
Oh, and it's huge. I mean, the word that came to mind when I was there is like, c'est démesuré.
Yeah.
It is oversized.
It's oversized.
It's like they have this.
It's like the Forum in Rome.
Yeah, but very large. I mean, like really big. And okay, so I was teasing this lady, our hostess, a little bit because, I think Georges Frêche had a bit of was a bit of a megalomaniac.
I can think of somebody else in the world right now who is probably in the same category.
Yes, but Georges Frêche was politically left-leaning.
Yes.
He was a socialist.
And he actually did good things for the city.
Yeah, and he did good things for the city. And which is kind of interesting because he was a socialist who got along with everybody. I mean, he was very forceful. Once he got an idea in his mind that he wanted to do, like a huge center to have medical conferences, well, there was no turning back.
There was no turning back.
He was going to do it, and he was going to find the funds. And I kept asking her, this lady, Josette, who was hosting us, where did he find the money to do all this? And she was like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, I don't know how he did it, but they poured money into this town. It is unbelievable. Even today, they were replacing some paving stones.
Yeah.
Close to the Arc de Triomphe. They're repaving the thing. I even took a picture of this because this is crazy. In Toulouse, when they repave something, they use little stone pavement that's probably 4 inches by 8.
Right.
And it's 4 inches thick. Over there, it's marble. The slabs are 60 by 30 and 30 thick. They are huge. They probably pay more for one piece of marble like that than we do to pave a whole street.
They may have very
Toulouse.
high property tax.
It may be that, but they really put in amazing quality, materials into the city. So anyway, this Georges Frêche, he was a socialist. He was elected in 1977, and he remained the mayor, and he remained in charge of the area because he was also the president of the region until his death in 2010. He got a lot of things done. He was a socialist, got along with everybody who went along with his plans very well. Not so well with people who weren't in agreement with him. And because he was too willing to cross political lines, he was never asked to be a minister in France. And remember that François Mitterrand, the first modern socialist president we had, was elected in 1980. 81, you're right. And he did a 14-year term. He did 2 terms.
2 terms.
And in all those 14 years, they never found the time to ask Frêche to do anything in Paris. Because he was too against the grain, I guess. But he had these big plans, and he pulled them off. They have the political center of Montpellier, where all the regional buildings are, where all the employees that work for the city, and the new city center. Well, la mairie, the building that houses all the
City Hall,
the employees. It's this big
big
thing
black building
along the side of the river.
Right.
But it's big. I mean, it's like huge.
Yeah, everything there is big. I mean, this is a city. This is not necessarily for talking about its historical value and as such, but as a modern city to live in. It has a mammoth, enormous Mediatek library, public library, much bigger than the one in Toulouse, which is already fairly big.
Yep.
And has wonderful services everywhere.
Yep.
It has a huge public Olympic-size pool.
Yep.
And all of these things are on the tramway line, so that makes them very easy to get to for everybody.
Yes.
And they are used by everybody. But they're also set in a way so that there are esplanades everywhere. And you can walk, and there are places, there are cafes, there are fountains in the new areas. There's a kind of user friendliness to the city.
Lots of people in the streets.
Really is amazing.
Lots of people in the streets.
Lots of people in the streets, and not just in the old city center.
Right.
And part of that, I think, is the fact that among the other things they did was they created 4 very extensive, well-planned tramway lines.
Yeah.
So that you can pretty much get from one end of the large city to the other, and you crisscross everywhere. And it's very easy, and it's inexpensive to use public transportation.
Yeah.
I think that, quite honestly, it's a city that is impressive from that point of view, almost more than anything else.
Yeah, the urban planning is done well.
And since the part of my family that lives there lives in one of these new areas, where there are lots of big apartment buildings, but even though each building, they're not all exactly the same, they work together stylistically, and it's surrounded by massive amounts of park and green area with fountains and places where you can sit and have a cafe. Unlike Toulouse, where once you leave the old city center, or you go to an area like where I live, because you live really outside of the city. Right. I live on the edge of the city. Yeah. Where I live, it's absolutely dead. There's nothing.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing.
Not a lot of commerce.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no place you can go and say, oh, this is a pretty place to sit in an outdoor cafe and look at a nice landscape.
Not yet. It might come because you have a lot of people moving in.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But what seems to have been the case in Montpellier is that they decided to do it from the very beginning.
They just planned it that way.
They planned it that way.
Yeah.
And it's really impressive to see.
And so the way we visited the city, and I recommend that you do that too, if you're so inclined, is, first of all, I think you should spend at least 2 days to see the city. It's too quick otherwise. But we went from the neoclassical part of the city, and we walked in a straight line to Place de la Comédie, more or less, and you go through a shopping mall called Antigone.
Right. No, that's Coram.
Is that Coram?
Yeah, that's Coram.
Antigone.
No, Antigone is the neoclassical one.
Okay, so I got confused with all these
Coram is the huge super
I believe you.
Shopping center.
Yeah. It was just crazy, all these Greek names for everything.
Right.
Like, anyway, so you go through the shopping center and you emerge on the other side on Place de la Comédie, which is huge as well.
Which is huge.
But it's not huge. Like visually, it's like elongated. So in surface, it's very big, but visually, it doesn't look.
Well, it's an old rectangle.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
a rectangle. Yeah,
it's got the theater on one side.
Yeah, and then we moved on from that, went through the old city center, and it's almost in a straight line. I'll put a map on journeystinfrance.com/104, and then you go through the city center, you get to this Arc de Triomphe, and then you cross a little street. It's all being renovated right now, so it doesn't look that great. I hope they get rid of all the barricades and all that, but you never know. And then you get to the statue of Louis XIV. Beyond that is a big, also classical-looking Chateau d'Eau, and then beyond that is the aqueduct.
Yeah.
There's a big piece of a Roman aqueduct left. Now, it's super long aqueduct, but it's above, it's off ground in that part. After that, it goes underground. And it doesn't run anymore.
No, it doesn't.
None of these things run anymore, but it's quite impressive. And so that's a walk that's about probably 3 to 4 kilometers altogether. And it's really nice, and it takes you from the neoclassical recent buildings, to the real classical aqueduct,
right?
Which is really an interesting way to look at the city,
right? And I actually did it very differently because we did it by taking the tramway to the Place de la Comédie.
Right, so you started in the middle of
this. We started right in the middle. The Place de la Comédie, which is, of course, one of the reasons it's called that is because of the major theater there, which was Molière's theater. Okay? This is where Molière was actually from Béziers, but he had there was a theater named after him at the time of Louis XIV. And so there's this magnificent theater there. That's another thing about Montpellier. It's very famous for dance.
Yep.
It has an opera. It has a major theater. It has a lot of culture because it is a major university city, and it has this tradition since the 1200s of having a lot of theater and a lot of music and everything else. And it is very, very famous for its dance, among other things. But from there, what we did was we literally wove our way through the old streets. And interestingly enough, you don't get that impression from the outside, but once you get into the old part, it is it's not super steep at all, but it's not flat.
Right, it's a little bit hilly.
It's a little bit hilly, and you have a section of the city which is filled with these very narrow medieval streets with tiny little baby squares, these like mini squares that you come across. Lots of little shops, lots of little places to eat.
Nice boutiques, yes.
Nice boutiques. Some of it's, interestingly enough, we spent about a half a day doing this, and my reaction to it was that in the old city center, about half of it was chic and very nice, and half of it was a little bit grungy. And I wasn't quite sure how that happened. There were streets.
There's so many young people per capita.
It's a lot of young people.
A lot of students.
Yeah,
so
like Toulouse, but Toulouse doesn't seem to have. Well, I mean, there was a part that was somehow really struck me as being quite grungy, and it's also that it had a feel of not having left the 1970s. I mean, it was like. There's, like tie-dye shops and,
right in.
All that kind of stuff.
But I'm wearing a tie-dye shirt.
Yeah, you are wearing a tie. But it's very interesting because the old city center gives you a great feel of what the whole place must have been like in the Renaissance times when it was really at its heyday, and then, of course, in the classical times. And we didn't really do, at the same time, a walk further out than going to the two big parks that are connected to the Place de la Comédie and the Corum. There's a lot to see,
Oh, yeah.
There's really a lot to see.
And we haven't even talked about the cathedral.
And the cathedral, and we haven't talked about the museum.
Yeah.
And I know you said, that's not something that appeals to you, but people should know if they're ever going to visit a city like Montpellier and they're with children, that they have absolutely a fabulous zoo.
Yes.
It really is. It's a zoo that is a good zoo. That's what my term is used for certain places that have a certain amount of space that's adequate for the animals, and that have a very large conservation program for re-establishing, certain animals that are endangered.
They also have an aquarium.
They have an aquarium, although I haven't visited the aquarium.
Me neither, but I know they have one.
But it's very interesting because it's a city that seems to really have a lot of activity of all kinds, So
it's honestly, when I was there, I was a little bit sad. I'm a little sad to say this, but I think Montpellier might be nicer than Toulouse.
I think that from a point of view maybe of a place to live, that might be true. If you accept living in a modern new area, and if you accept living in an apartment building, because what is being built is all apartment buildings.
That's right.
And that is, of course, one of the political decisions that they made, that instead of doing urban sprawl, we had a short visit with somebody who was explaining to us that what they're doing is called inclusion. And what that means is that rather than covering all the hillsides as far as the eye can see, they're actually reusing anything that's internal land and building on it, but building in apartment buildings.
Right. So a few stories high. It's not like skyscrapers or anything.
No.
Right.
But it's 8 to 10. 8 to 10 is pretty much what they're doing right now.
Yeah.
And that's a good way of using the land to accommodate new people.
Whereas where you live, they're doing a lot of 3 to 4.
They're doing a lot of 3 to 4. All over, with no coherence.
Yeah. No cohesion,
No, there's no cohesion in what they're doing,
Right.
So I can understand that. And of course, I know a lot of people who say that between the public transportation, the services that are offered, the fact that it is near the sea, the fact that
the climate
is much better. That is one of the reasons why so many people want to go there, which is, of course, one of the reasons why it is very expensive.
The houses didn't seem more than Toulouse. When this is only me stopping at one. I looked at the window of one agency, and I was like, that looks, similar to Toulouse.
It may
maybe
not be.
Less.
It actually, I don't even know how it compares to Toulouse, but I know that what I've heard from people is that it has gotten to the point where a lot of people feel like it's too expensive, and that people who may have been living there and have to change their residence are having a hard time because, of course, the demand makes the prices go up.
Yeah. And the other thing that happens there, that happens in Provence as well, is that even if you do get outside of the city a little bit and you have an individual home, the lots, the building lots are tiny.
They're tiny.
Tiny.
Yeah.
So, and Provence really gave me that impression that people were, even if they had an individual home, they were all on top of one another. Montpellier is kind of that direction. Around where I live, I have neighbors that are not very far, but they're not on top of me.
Well, but I think that's part of the fact that Montpellier, which is actually technically not Provence. Of course,
No.
This is still Languedoc, but we're at the beginning of this mass of urban development that circles the coast of the Mediterranean, that goes from Montpellier basically to Marseille. And I'm sure that
All
if
the
you
way to
looked at it
Italy.
from a plane, it's just all
yeah.
lights at night. I mean, this is the problem, is that everybody wants to go where the weather is nice.
Yes.
And this
it's
is
very
what happens.
nice.
Yeah.
And also the other thing that happens, this is something that doesn't concern visitors very much, but politically, this whole area of Provence and even Languedoc-Roussillon is very right-wing.
Yes.
Most of it, except for Montpellier.
Yes.
Very conservative to the point of being almost extreme right-wing, some of it.
This area, not as bad as the Var, but it's still...
Exactly. And so politically, I'm like, they're a bit extreme. But Montpellier is not.
Montpellier is not.
Right. So,
No.
So,
But that is... Montpellier, like Toulouse, is a major university intellectual center.
Right.
Therefore, it is not going to be like that.
Yeah.
It's just not.
So
Can we
what-
talk a little bit about the museum?
Of course. Let's talk about the museum.
Let's talk about the museum. One of the major things, besides the wonderful, beautiful old structures, remnants, and the old streets, is a museum that actually is very, very famous, and outside of Paris is considered to be one of the best art museums in France. Mm-hmm. And the museum is called the Musée Fabre.
Yes.
There was a man who, in the end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s, was a baron. He was an aristocrat, but he was also a very serious painter. He'd actually studied in Paris, and he actually had a Prix de Rome, which means that he was really
Nice.
quite good.
Yeah.
And his name was Fabre.
Yes.
That was his last name, obviously. That was his name.
F-A-B-R-E.
F-A-B-R-E. And Mr. Fabre, let's see if I can find his exact name. I don't know if I wrote that. He had a very long name with like lots and lots of first names. But he was one of the old aristocrats from the area. Mm-hmm. And because he was relatively famous as an artist, I have to admit that I'd never heard of him before. And he was also part of the family that has created the Fabre pharmaceutical industry. It's the same family.
Okay.
They're another branch of the same family.
Yeah.
When he was an old man, he decided that he wanted to give his entire collection, not only of his own work, but of all of the paintings of masters' work that he had collected in his lifetime, to the city of Montpellier.
Nice.
And he made a deal with them, which is very often the way these things work. And he said he would leave his massive collection to the city of Montpellier if the collection was not broken up, and they would make a museum for it. I don't know if he stipulated that the museum had to have his name, but they did indeed give it the name of the Fabre Museum.
Yeah.
And it was created, believe it or not, in 1824.
Well, so it's old.
Very, very old.
Yeah.
And not only that, it literally is one of the oldest art museums. That's a public art museum in France. There were a couple of others before that, but one of the things that made it important was the collection he had. He had a huge collection of paintings that started basically with the classical painters and worked their way up. And so what happened was the museum became quite famous. But where was the museum? The museum was in a gorgeous 1700s classical building that had been a mansion. Mm-hmm. And this beautiful museum opens up right now onto the Esplanade.
Place de la Comédie?
That's very close to the Place de la Comédie. It's not exactly the Place de la Comédie.
Okay.
You go around the corner basically on a right angle, and it's a beautiful park Esplanade that will take you right there. Mm-hmm. So what happened was that over a certain amount of time, the museum became very well known. And I actually, to be very honest, living here in Toulouse and having not really spent a lot of time in Montpellier, I knew nothing about this museum until the year 2002, because it was in 2002 that the museum closed for major renovation work. And it was reopened in 2007.
Okay.
And what happened was that they took this gorgeous classical building, they added on 2 new wings to it. They added, interestingly enough, when you go to the museum, what you will see is that if you come up the back street, not just along the esplanade that's in front of it, but if you come off the back street, you will see that what they've taken is another classical building that was a mansion that was right behind it, and they've actually inside broken through the walls and used that. And then they added on a modern wing on the other side. So it has a very grand entrance leading up to it and a beautiful, beautiful high hallway inside. But once you go inside, you realize that it's a huge museum because it encompasses what basically is the equivalent of 3 buildings. And the entire museum has 9,000 square meters.
So that's a lot, yeah.
Which is a big museum. Okay. It also,
it's not the Louvre big, but
it's not the Louvre big, but it is really one of the biggest. But what makes it that important is its collection. And it has an enormous collection of paintings that go up from the end of 1600s, beginning of 1700s, up through a whole wing that has modern and contemporary artwork. And it has a special wing devoted to temporary exhibits. And so ever since it's been reopened in 2007, it is considered to be one of, if not the best, art museum outside of Paris. And it also has a designation. It's very interesting because it is actually run in terms of its budget by the city of Montpellier, but it is designated as a Musée de France, which is basically a category. It means it has a certain standing as a museum. That is very, very important. But just to give some people an idea, I just was there when I was there in January, and I went because I wanted to see what this museum was like, since I'd heard and read so much about it, but also because in the special wing devoted to temporary exhibits, they did something which apparently I hadn't realized, because in the United States it's not quite like that. It was something new to do in France. Again, there's a certain provincial mentality in a lot of the museums in France. And that is interesting to know, is that the Museum Fabre has made a decision, whoever it is that decides these things, that it will not only show European art, but it will also show non-European art. Okay. So the exhibit that was there, and it is a shame that you missed it because it was fabulous, was an exhibit of Senufo art. Senufo art is art from Western Africa. It's from the region of Senegal, Mali, Chad, and all of that area. The Senufo was a group of civilizations that created magnificent pieces of sculpture. So it was entirely sculptural work. And it was one of the largest exhibits of sculptural African art outside of Paris that you would ever see. But also, they have made this as a political decision, which I find really interesting, that all the time that in this special temporary exhibit space, they will not simply have local or French or modern European work, but they will search for other cultures or to show it so that people are exposed to things other than just Western art. So I have to say that even my husband, who is not someone who likes spending a lot of time in museums, we had almost a full day in the museum.
Right.
We went to the museum. We spent a couple of hours looking at the European painting. We went out, we had lunch, we went back and spent another couple of hours looking at the temporary exhibit, and it was a fabulous time. And among
I think we could have, but I was kind of tired, and we got there a little bit too late to see very much.
Yeah,
of
well,
it.
you probably wouldn't have had time to really appreciate it.
No,
that way.
and if we did a lot of walking in Montpellier, and I think once you've walked all this way and you consider doing a big museum at the end, you're like, oh.
No, you can't do a big museum at the end of a day.
Yeah.
Especially been walking that much.
Yeah. So
that's another reason why 2 days there is good, because you really get to see a lot of things.
Yeah. And you might need 3. If you really want to spend a day in the museum, you might need 3.
I don't agree, but that's just me. I mean, I don't think that Montpellier is a 3-day place to visit.
No?
But no, I just don't.
Maybe.
Not unless you spend a day at the beach. then I would,
Which you could.
Which you could.
And also, I looked it up earlier. You told me that you could go to the beach on the tramway.
Right.
And yes, you can kind of. You take
But
the
you have to
tramway.
take a bus.
And then you take a bus after that.
But it is really very, very
But you can
close.
go to the beach on
Yes.
public transportation. That's really good.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention this because in talking about the museum, it was really, the collection of paintings was really very impressive. And what they have is the biggest collection of paintings by the French painter Courbet in France. They have 16 of his paintings, which were collected by Mr. Fabre and people who came after him. They have a huge collection of Impressionism, Post-Impressionism. They have Delacroix, David. They have a Rubens. It's really outside outside of Paris. It's probably one of the best comprehensive collections of work, and they have a lot of sculpture, which is your thing, I know, that you would really like. And the building is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Because again,
it looks nice. Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was impressive about it was that they incorporated the new wing, which is totally modern 21st century, into a 1700s building, and it works really well.
Yeah.
And it's user-friendly. There are elevators everywhere. There are bathrooms everywhere.
That's good.
This is not typical of old museums everywhere you go, you know.
Yeah.
And just to mention a couple of things, if you leave Montpellier city center itself, if you have a car and you want to do a little bit of exploring very close to it, you can obviously go to the beach. There are several beaches, literally, that, as we mentioned, that are 5-10 minutes away by car, unless you get into one of these horrible traffic jams. There's also
or take the tram, and then you won't get into a traffic jam.
Yes, or you won't. But there's this fabulous place called Maguelone, which is a land. It's actually a sand spit. It's a little piece of land that almost jets out into the water. That was the place of what was the original cathedral that changed into the heart of Montpellier when it became a major city, basically in the 13th century. But we went there too. It's surrounded by vineyards, so you can see the grapevines everywhere. And it's this absolutely exquisite piece of land you can visit the church, what's left of the church, which is actually from the 13 and 1400s. It has special buildings there where they have a special school and a training center for young people who are a little bit handicapped, so they can be inserted into a work situation. So it has a lovely little restaurant that you can eat in there. And you have a view of the water with the grapevines, and if you turn around and look back, you can see vaguely in the not very far distance just the skyline of the city of Montpellier.
Nice.
And it's I think 7 or 8 kilometers from the city.
Yeah, I have. Josette gave me a lot of recommendations. We haven't gotten to a lot of stuff. We've been talking almost an hour already, and we have. This is the type of place where there's a lot to do and a lot to see and a lot to do and see nearby. Which I will try to incorporate on the website to tell you more about, recommendations of what you can do nearby. But it's a truly
it's a nice place.
It's a nice place.
It's
a nice place. If you're going to spend some time in the south, consider Montpellier. It's
actually a good base, I think, also for going and spending time doing day trips. Because you can go in many different directions from there and find really interesting things to see. Yeah. It's
very nice. So, go to Montpellier.
Go to Montpellier. You can go by train. You can go by car.
Yeah, I would say in the city, maybe don't take
a car.
Yeah,
no.
Because the public transportation is really good and parking there
is notoriously bad.
Yeah, it didn't look particularly easy, and also it's a lot of one-way streets, and so you'll lose your way. I mean, now that people have GPSs, it's not quite as bad, but it's not easy to navigate by car. So I wouldn't plan on that.
But it's definitely a very interesting city to see.
Yes, and if you run into Igor, my friend Igor, remember that before you pet a guide dog, say hello to the owner first.
Good lesson.
Because if the guide dog is working, and trust me, he has plenty of work to do, because Montpellier is one of those cities that has a lot of everything flat on the ground. So it's very accessible for wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of curbs. But if you're blind and you need to find your way, you could be, to you, it feels like it's perfectly smooth and you're right in front of a tram. If you didn't see the tracks, if you can't see the tracks, you don't know the tram's coming. Right. And so the dog is trained to sit and watch for specific points to stop and let his owner know that, we're about to cross where there's a tram. But you don't want to distract him when he's working that, because it could get very dangerous. So there you go. Public service announcement. Always say hi to the person first before petting the guide dog. There you go. Thank you, everybody. It's been fun to talk to you, Elise.
Oh, now I want to go and see the sea and have the sun.
Yeah, and have the sea so close. That would be so nice.
That would be so nice.
I don't know that people who live there actually go to the sea that much, because that's what happens.
I think they do.
You get busy and... Yeah.
At least the people I know, they do.
Yeah, your family, they go a lot?
They do, and they go towards the water, or when it comes summertime and there's this huge influx of people, they head up into the hills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very popular, very touristy in the summer months. Yeah. So you won't be the only one there for sure. If you go, but it's a lovely
and the
place.
Wines, we didn't even mention.
We didn't talk about the gastronomy. That's right. We
have to do
5
another
minutes.
one.
Well, 5 minutes on the gastronomy.
Okay, this is an area that in the Middle Ages, believe it or not, was considered to be the best wine in France.
Huh.
We forget Bordeaux. I mean, Bordeaux is the convention of the English, and the fact that they had married Eleanor of Aquitaine and all of that. This is actually literally in the Middle Ages. This is where the kings came to get their wine. Mm-hmm. And it was famous because the climate is absolutely perfect. It's sandy soil, it's limestone, it's got all the sun you need. It just has everything. The reality is that what happened was in the end of the 19th century, they overproduced. The quality of the wine became horrible. Mm-hmm. And then they had, like everywhere in France, the horrible epidemic of phylloxera, which is a fungus, I believe, or bacteria. I'm not sure which one it is, but I believe it's a fungus that actually killed off all of the grapevines. So what happened was that in the first half of the 20th century, the only wines that were produced in this area wound up being just your ordinary, very, very very poor quality table wines. Nobody considered them to be very good anymore. And it's in the last 30, 40 years that the Languedoc wines have come back in full force. Right. And they're wonderful wineries all the way around there. And as I mentioned to you, I was there for a weekend of a wine tasting festival. What a wonderful thing to do. In front of on the Grand Esplanade, which at that time I didn't realize was actually right in front of the museum. And they had all these booths of all of these vineyards that were set up so you could taste them, and wonderful reds and wonderful whites, absolutely delicious wines. They also do a lot of
rosé.
Right. They do a little, but they didn't do not as much as Provence actually.
Yeah, okay.
But really delicious whites and reds, and a lot of organic whites and reds as well. Yeah. Small vineyards that are really working on the quality, and so they've been winning some awards. So it's a wonderful thing to do is to taste their wines in the area.
And they have a lot of they have this long cookie that's les languettes de Montpellier, which are very nice. It's like a sugar cookie with a bit of orangey lilac.
You know what? I think it even has a little white wine in it.
Oh, it could.
I think it does.
It's very
good. Very good. Yes.
They have the Grisette de Montpellier, which is little candy, little black candy. Oh, I have a box right over there.
I don't know those. Are they licorice?
Yes. So it's licorice and honey.
Oh.
And somebody told us that the man who owns the patent is an old ornery guy who doesn't want to sell his patent to anybody, and he's going to die taking the recipe to his grave. I don't know if that's true or not. But the Grisette de Montpellier are not very easy to find in Montpellier because we stopped at several stores asking. But I found them online. There you go. Buy them online.
Wow.
They have Set has these crab cakes.
Yes. They're seafood
very
cakes.
Nice.
They're seafood torts that are tiny little ones.
Yeah.
Now that's Set though. That's not
but it's like 25 kilometers
But
away.
the thing is that they have a real Mediterranean cuisine.
Yes,
right?
they do. They have. I mean, we ate really, really well. You know, it's very nice. I was impressed with the gastronomy, and I'm sure the wine would be very nice.
Oh, the wine! I have to say, I had 2 or 3 wines that were basically Chardonnays, and they were all very different, and they were totally delicious, all of them.
See, there you go.
There you go.
So. Enjoy the food and wine too. There,
oh well, when do we go? When are we going, Annie?
Well, I'm gonna go again because Igor is over there, and I gotta go give him a pet every now and then because he's my bud. But he comes to visit us too. It's nice. It's wonderful. So, there you go. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good meal out there.
Yes. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
If you enjoy the show, let us know. Many thanks to listeners who donate to the show or use our Amazon and hotel booking links on joinusinfrance.com or on the show notes on your phone. Most people who find the show do it through a recommendation from a friend. If you share the show with a friend, let me know so I can fuss over you and thank you properly. The other way people learn about the show is through mentions on TripAdvisor, travel sites, and blogs. Thank you for dropping our name here and there. It really helps, and I'll be happy to fuss over you also if you let me know. Thank you. Have a great time in France. And when you come back, consider sharing your experiences in France with the other listeners. I really enjoy doing trip reports with you. Au revoir.